Throughout the course of human civilization, fear has driven people to make particular choices or take specific actions. With urban legends, folklore, horror literature, and gothic horror stories haunting the minds of everyday people, using horror as an entertainment purpose has gone back in history farther than most people care to realize. The ancient Egyptians believed in ghosts, while the ancient Greeks and Romans told scary stories around the campfires about monsters, ghosts, and the afterlife. Horror movies have touched on and exposed people's deepest fears for hundreds of years. The first stories that spawned a very popular monster in the horror genre was a man called Vlad the Impaler Tepesh, a ruthless 15th century prince who feasted upon his impaled victim's blood. This man would cause the vampire to be created by Abraham Stoker in his very popular bestseller Dracula. The first movie to be made from this book was Nosferatu, which means Spiritus Immundus, or unclean spirit. Along with this movie, many more popular monsters would get their own movies, such as The Mummy, Frankenstein, and The Wolfman. Other literary monsters, such as Mummy, Frankenstein, were made into films, but the werewolf, or Wolfman, was not cemented by a singular actor, author, book, or horror series. It instead is a truly ancient concept dating back to the pre-literature sagas and legends told by Europeans centuries ago. So what scared me most when I was a kid was, obviously being afraid of the dark. What's underneath my bed, what's in the closet kind of thing. Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, very scary. It's inside your dreams, you can't do anything. And being a little kid, Chucky from Child's Play.
As a child, I was scared of two things really. I was really terrified of snakes for the longest time, and then probably biggest fear as a child that I can remember is my mother's boyfriend.
As a child, and to this day, I am still most scared of spiders. Spiders have always been my biggest fear, and I scream like a little baby when I see one.
What was I most scared of as a child? Kind of like Alfred Hitchcock. The only thing I was ever really scared of was being locked up somewhere. Kind of like getting arrested for something I didn't do, or even something I did do. But also, I was really shy, and I was kind of scared of being in public and having to interact with a lot of people.
In George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, a nuclear event caused the dead to rise. There is no more room in hell. The dead will rise and walk the earth. Romero, through zombies, a swarm-like virus in human corpse form, show fear can still surprise and shock us. Zombies can be stopped individually, but can overwhelm with large numbers. Dracula, Frankenstein, and other powerful monsters cannot be stopped individually, while the scariest thing about zombies is the overwhelming numbers, when collected and directed at their victims, paralyze the body with pure terror. Romero's zombie story opened people's eyes to the dead. Horror was no longer a simple pulp genre, but was now an art form. The Exorcist was the first movie that spawned lines around the block, changing the face of horror. Touching on established institutions such as religious iconography and a complexity of modern-day science, The Exorcist attacks base fears from different directions. A mother paralyzed by self-doubt, a family in danger, draws in the audience, so much so that they needed to have vomit bags so that people could not vomit on the floor. Movie studios, recognizing the money-making opportunity, seek to cash in by creating sequels. From 1975 on, horror movies proved to be big money genre, and so were churned out en masse by the big studios. The Omen, directed by Roman Polanski, touched on the nature of fear of your child's birth and the devil. Carrie, directed by Brian De Palma, touched on isolation and bullies in high school and the fear of telepathy from maybe a overzealous psychopath. In George A. Romero's follow-up to Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, we started to see things from different perspectives, not just the victims of the zombie, but perhaps the zombie as well. These films were a few examples of extraordinary art that made extraordinary money. With John Carpenter's Halloween, the 70s were a boon for creative directors happy to startle, shock, and terrify. John Carpenter's Halloween began the slasher movement. Sequels would follow, and an entire genre would become the future of horror films.
I think that the original horror movies, like all the Universal movies like Dracula and Frankenstein, by modern standards, they're more creepy than scary. But I still think the first Nosferatu, with the when vampires were considered creatures, almost like vermin, versus handsome, suave people that just happen to be undead and need blood to survive. I think it's a little creepier having them more animalistic, and they have a little hypnotic power. I think monster.
The change, horror movies have changed so much from even when I was a child, where it was less about the buckets of gore and splatter, and more about creating a mood and environment where don't go in that room, and it's terrifying. And then when you get the big payoff, the big scare, it was more reactionary type horror, more than revulsion and sort of blood for blood's sake. You look at things like Psycho, when she's killed in the shower scene, you don't even actually see it. You see shadows of the knife coming down, where if you look at some of the more gruesome things in horror today, like the Hostel sequences, where it's just full-on eviscerating a human body, just for entertainment. Where's the real human emotion? Where's the real story there, other than violence for its own sake? So I think horror has moved away from a human sensibility and moved into more of a monster sensibility, where the monsters are the heroes, and that's a failing.
The change in horror movies over the last 100 years has been mostly bad. The effects have gotten better, while the actual plots have gotten much worse. Scary movies like Freddy Krueger, Jason, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, all of those guys, Mike Myers, they really scared you. The quality of the movies, you watch them now and the effects aren't so great, but they're great movies. But then you watch movies like Paranormal Activity, the effects are great, but sometimes it leaves you wanting more.
So horror movies have changed a lot over the past 100 years. Silent movies, people are talking black and white. You've got CGI now. I think it's a definite improvement in most movies, because you can tell the story that's written on the page. A long time ago, we couldn't get a lot of images on the screen because it didn't look real. Computer animation and stop motion animation and miniatures and things like that, we can make really scary stuff come alive that doesn't exist in the natural world. So I'm a big fan of the progression of technology in movies. With the success of Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and the like, movie studios now recognize the money-making opportunity in sequels, and so make their money.